Anger management in Islam was modern psychology. What if I told you that the most dangerous enemy in your life isn't out there? It's not your boss, not your neighbor, not even that person who betrayed you. It's something living inside you, your anger. Now here's the shocking truth. Anger has destroyed more marriages than infidelity. It has ended more friendships than lies. It has caused wars, murders, and regrets people carry for a lifetime. But here's the twist. Islam recognized this thousands of years ago, long before psychology even existed. Let me ask you, have you ever said something in anger and wished you could take it back? One sentence, one look, one outburst, and suddenly the damage is done. Modern psychology calls anger a secondary emotion, meaning it usually hides something deeper: fear, pain, or frustration. But Islam calls anger a test of your strength. So the next time anger knocks on your door, ask yourself, am I going to let this destroy me, or am I going to rise above it? Remember, psychology gives you tools. Islam gives you tools and meaning. And when you have both, you don't just survive your anger, you own it. And that, my friends, is the true power. Because you're not ordinary, you're not average. You are among those chosen to know the secret, that strength isn't in the punch, it's in the pause. Anger is not just an emotion, it's a hidden enemy that can destroy lives if uncontrolled. Modern psychology sees anger as a secondary emotion masking deeper feelings. Islam views anger as a test of strength, teaching self-control as true power. Psychology offers techniques, say breathing, reframing, while Islam adds spiritual purpose, say wudu, dua, remembering Allah. Both approaches complement each other. One focuses on the mind, the other on the soul. True mastery is not eliminating anger, but transforming it into patience, wisdom, and strength. Anger is not just an emotion. It is often the most dangerous hidden enemy that people carry within them, silent yet explosive. Like a volcano waiting for the right moment to erupt. It doesn't knock politely, it storms in without warning. One minute you are calm, composed, even smiling. And then suddenly something tiny, almost insignificant, flips the switch. A misplaced word, a careless mistake, a small insult. And before you even realize it, that enemy inside you grabs the steering wheel of your heart and takes control of your actions, your words, your face, your very identity. That's why anger has destroyed more relationships than infidelity ever could. Because unlike betrayal, which often comes once and is discovered later, anger attacks in the moment. It demands to be expressed. And when it is expressed, it burns everything in its path. Think of the times you've seen anger change a person you love. A parent shouting at a child until the child shrinks back in fear. A husband yelling at his wife over something trivial until the love in her eyes quietly fades. A friend exploding over a minor disagreement until years of trust feel suddenly fragile. Those moments don't just pass, they leave scars. You may apologize, you may regret, you may even cry over what you've done. But the truth is, some words spoken in anger never fully leave the ears of the person who heard them. They echo, they replay. They wound deeper than a knife because, unlike a physical injury, words don't heal with time, they replay with memory. Psychologists say that anger is often a mask. Beneath it, there is usually fear, pain, or frustration. A child throws a tantrum not because he hates his parent, but because he feels powerless. A man yells at his wife not because he stopped loving her, but because he feels unappreciated or unseen. A woman snaps at her coworker not because she despises her, but because she is overwhelmed and exhausted. The tragedy, however, is that when anger is the mask, we often forget to look beneath it. We deal with the outburst but ignore the wound. And so the cycle repeats again and again. Islam takes this understanding and raises it higher. The Prophet Muhammad said, anger comes from the devil, and the devil was created from fire, and fire is extinguished only with water. That is not just a poetic metaphor. It is a reminder that anger is destructive in its very essence, like flames that consume everything near them. Left unchecked, And anger can burn not only relationships but also one's own dignity, one's own faith, one's own inner peace. That is why the Prophet also taught, if one of you becomes angry while standing, let him sit down. If the anger leaves him, good. If not, let him lie down. Notice the wisdom here. It is not just about calming the body, it is about humbling the ego. Because anger thrives when ego stands tall, demanding to be respected, obeyed, honored. But when you physically lower yourself, you remind your soul that you are not a god. You are a servant. Think of the battlefield, where anger should be justified, where rage could be excused, where blood and loss might demand revenge. Yet the Prophet even in the heat of war, showed restraint that baffled his enemies. Once, a man who hated him more than anyone else was captured and placed at his mercy. Imagine the tension, the silence, the eyes watching. In that moment, most leaders would have unleashed fury. But the Prophet forgave him. That act of mastering anger didn't just save one man's life. It melted a heart that years of arguments could not. That man became Muslim. Anger could have ended a life, restraint opened a soul. But we don't need battlefields to understand this. Look around in everyday life. A driver cuts you off in traffic, and suddenly you feel your chest tighten, your grip harden, your tongue prepare a curse. At that moment, your anger is telling you, react, shout, show him you matter. But if you pause, if you let the wave pass, you realize that man might be rushing to the hospital. He might be carrying bad news. Or maybe he's just careless. Either way, your peace is worth more than his mistake. And isn't that the essence of it? Anger pretends to protect your pride, but in reality, it steals your peace. It convinces you to lash out, but when the storm is over, it leaves you standing among the ruins of your own words, regretting what you cannot take back. That's why the Prophet didn't just warn against anger. He was once asked, give me advice. And he said 3 times, do not become angry. Not because we will never feel anger, it is human, but because the true danger is letting anger control you rather than you controlling it. So anger at its core is not just a passing feeling. It is a hidden enemy capable of destroying homes, friendships, faith and futures. And the greatest deception is that it feels powerful in the moment when, in reality, it makes you weak, exposing every wound you tried to hide. The strongest among us are not the ones who never feel anger. They are the ones who, when anger comes knocking, recognize it for what it is. An enemy dressed as an emotion, a fire disguised as a shield. Modern psychology describes anger as a secondary emotion. A surface wave crashing above the ocean, while beneath it lie the deeper, darker currents of fear, hurt, and frustration. It means anger is rarely the real problem. It is the mask the heart wears to cover something more fragile. Think of a child who lashes out, screaming and kicking when a toy is taken away. On the surface, it looks like rage. But if you look closer, you'll see something different. The child feels powerless, unheard, small. Anger is just the armor protecting that weakness. Adults are no different. A father who shouts at his teenage son for coming home late isn't necessarily furious about the time. Beneath his anger is worry, fear that something bad could have happened. A woman who snaps at her husband for forgetting an errand isn't always angry about the missing groceries. Beneath her words is a deeper pain, perhaps the loneliness of feeling unvalued or the exhaustion of carrying too many burdens alone. This is why psychologists call anger a messenger. It is the alarm bell, not the fire itself. But here lies the danger when the alarm goes off. Most of us smash it instead of listening to it. We shout, we slam doors. We throw words like daggers. Instead of asking, what is my anger trying to tell me? We let it dictate the story. And the story it tells in the moment is always distorted. A husband interprets his wife's sigh as disrespect and reacts with fury, when in truth she is simply tired. A friend assumes a short reply is rejection and explodes, when in truth the other person is distracted by their own problems. Anger blinds us to what lies beneath, and in doing so, it blinds us to truth. Islam acknowledges this reality but frames it in an even more profound way. The Prophet Muhammad said, "Verily, anger spoils faith as vinegar spoils honey." Notice how vivid that imagery is. Anger, left unchecked, doesn't just cover over what is sweet, it corrodes it. The deeper feelings of fear or sadness are natural, even human. But when anger is the expression chosen, it poisons what could have been addressed with compassion. Imagine a man who feels unappreciated at work. Beneath his anger is hurt, the ache of being unseen. If he were to communicate that honestly, saying, "I feel invisible here," he might find understanding. But if his hurt comes out only as rage, slamming desks, yelling at colleagues, the sweetness of his honesty turns bitter, like honey drowned in vinegar. There's a saying in therapy, if you listen to your anger, it will tell you what you need. Islam would add, if you master your anger, it will tell you who you are. That is why the Prophet didn't say strength lies in never feeling anger. He said true strength lies in controlling it. Because to control it, you must be willing to look beneath it. You must be brave enough to face the fear of rejection, the sting of pain, the vulnerability of love. That is much harder than shouting. It is easy to slam a door. It is much harder to open your heart. Consider a real-world scenario. A mother comes home from work, exhausted, and finds her children arguing. The noise is overwhelming. Her anger rises quickly, and she yells. The house falls silent, but her heart feels heavier. Why? Because her anger wasn't truly about the noise. Beneath it was fatigue, the quiet cry for rest. If she had listened to the deeper layer, she might have said, "Mommy needs 10 minutes of quiet, please." That would have given her what she truly needed without the regret that follows yelling. But anger doesn't like honesty, it prefers the mask. Another example, a young man rejected in a relationship often feels a surge of anger, sometimes directing it toward the person who rejected him. But beneath the fire is the cold truth. He feels unwanted, inadequate, broken. If he recognized that, he could seek healing, learn, and grow. If he doesn't, he might let anger harden into bitterness, blaming others while never facing the wound within. This is why anger, as psychology explains, is never the first emotion. It is the shield. And Islam recognizes shields can protect but also deceive. When anger is treated as the primary problem, we fight it directly, counting to 10, breathing deeply, walking away. But when we treat it as a messenger, we ask the deeper questions. What am I afraid of? What pain am I hiding? What wound am I protecting? And in that moment, both modern psychology and Islamic wisdom meet. Because the Prophet's advice, "Do not become angry," isn't about denying the feeling, but about refusing to let it dominate you, refusing to let the mask define the person beneath. So anger is not just rage in the moment. It is the language of an inner wound, speaking loudly because it feels unheard. If you silence the noise and listen closely, you will discover what is really being said. Not hatred, not fury, but the trembling voice of pain, the quiet whisper of fear, the fragile confession of love longing to be acknowledged. The Prophet Muhammad once said, "The strong man is not the one who overcomes others by his strength, but the one who controls himself while angry." At first glance, it seems simple, almost obvious. But if you pause, if you let the words sink in, you realize it is one of the most radical redefinitions of strength the world has ever known. Imagine a society where men prided themselves on conquest, on physical dominance, on their ability to overpower others. In that setting, the Prophet flipped the script. Strength, he declared, is not in the fist that strikes hardest or the sword that wins battles. True strength is invisible. It is in the heart that restrains itself, the tongue that holds back, the soul that refuses to be a slave to rage. Think of it like this: anyone can lift a rock and throw it. Anyone can scream when provoked. Anyone can slam a door or break a plate. But how many can feel the fire rising in their chest, hear the blood rushing in their ears, and still choose silence? That takes more power than muscles ever could. That is why a man who can conquer cities may still be a weak man if he cannot conquer himself. And a woman who seems delicate and quiet may in fact be the strongest in the room if she has mastered her temper. Modern psychology echoes this wisdom. Therapists often say that anger is an energy, and energy is powerful only when directed, not when it explodes blindly. They use words like emotional regulation, which simply means the ability to feel the storm without letting the storm sink the ship. Islam, in its own timeless way, gave the same guidance centuries ago. When you feel angry, change your posture. If standing, sit. If sitting, lie down. If that doesn't work, go make wudu. Each step is a practical way of saying, don't let the fire spread, redirect it, cool it, lower yourself. It is not suppression, it is mastery. Picture this in a real-life scene. A father comes home, weary from work, his nerves stretched thin. His young son accidentally breaks a glass. In that split second, anger surges, ready to burst out in shouts and threats. But the father remembers the saying of the Prophet A. He takes a breath, sits down, and looks into his son's frightened eyes. Instead of unleashing fury, he chooses patience. He says softly, "Be careful next time, my son." That moment of control does not just save a glass, it saves the bond between father and child. Years later, the child may not remember the broken glass, but he will remember the look of mercy on his father's face, the safety he felt in that moment when anger could have crushed him. Strength in anger is also the strength to forgive. There is a story of a servant who once spilled water on Ali ibn Abi Talib, the cousin of the Prophet. The servant, terrified of punishment, recited a verse from the Quran describing those who restrain their anger and pardon people. Ali, upon hearing this, smiled and said, "I have restrained my anger." The servant continued the verse, "And Allah loves the doers of good." Ali then replied, "I have pardoned you, and now I will free you." Can you see the power in that moment? What began as an accident that could have sparked rage ended with freedom and mercy, all because anger was transformed into strength. But think of the opposite as well. How many marriages have fallen apart not because of great betrayal, but because of small, repeated explosions of temper? A sharp tone at dinner, a slammed door in the middle of an argument, a sarcastic remark that cut too deep. None of these seem like major battles, but together they erode love until nothing remains but resentment. And all the while both partners may still love each other deeply. But love suffocated by anger becomes love unrecognizable. This is why the Prophet's redefinition of strength is revolutionary, because it reminds us that true power is not in dominating others, but in dominating the self. Psychology speaks of emotional intelligence, the ability to recognize and manage your own emotions while understanding those of others. Islam speaks of the same reality, but ties it to faith. To control your anger is not just good for relationships, it is good for your soul. It is an act of worship, a form of jihad, the greater struggle. Imagine how different the world would be if everyone lived by this principle. If leaders paused before sending armies, if parents paused before shouting at children, if spouses paused before saying that one cruel sentence that cannot be taken back, entire wars might have been avoided. Families might have remained whole. Friendships might have endured. That is the power hidden in restraint. And perhaps the most beautiful part is this: when you control your anger, you are not weaker for it. People often think silence means defeat. But in reality, silence in the face of anger is triumph. Because you did not let your enemy win, and sometimes the greatest enemy is not the one standing in front of you. It is the fire burning within you. Modern psychology gives us a toolbox for anger. Count to 10, breathe deeply, reframe the thought, walk away. These methods are effective because they interrupt the cycle of rage before it explodes. When your heart is racing and your mind is fogged by adrenaline, simply pausing can save you from words you will regret for years. Breathing slows down the body's response. Reframing allows you to challenge irrational thoughts like "she always disrespects me" or "he never cares about me," and instead see the situation more clearly. Walking away provides distance until clarity returns. These are valuable tools. They work because they target the mind and body. They calm the storm on the surface. But Islam doesn't stop at calming the storm. It teaches you how to anchor the ship so you don't get lost again. The Prophet Muhammad gave advice that seems simple but carries profound depth. He said, "If one of you becomes angry while standing, let him sit down. If the anger leaves him, good. If not, let him lie down." He also said, "Anger is from the devil, and the devil is made of fire. So if one of you becomes angry, let him perform wudu." At first, these might sound like symbolic gestures, but look closer. Sitting down lowers your body, humbles your stance, softens your ego. Lying down goes even further. It reminds you that you are not above others, that you are destined to return to the ground. Wudu, washing your face, arms, and feet with cool water, is not just a ritual cleansing. It physically lowers the body temperature, cooling the heat of anger, while spiritually reminding you that you stand before Allah, not just another person. Psychology says, take a pause. But Islam ties that pause to humility, to worship, to remembering your true position in the universe. That is a purpose far greater than self-control alone. Consider a real life scene. A man comes home after a long, exhausting day. His wife has also had a difficult day with the children. Dinner isn't ready. The house is messy. The man feels irritation boiling. Psychology would tell him, breathe, reframe. Remind yourself she is also tired. Walk away until you cool down, and this can work. But Islam would add, before you say a word, seek refuge in Allah from shaitan, sit down and go make wudu. Suddenly it isn't just about avoiding conflict. It becomes about remembering your duty as a believer, about not letting shaitan use your anger to destroy your home, about turning your frustration into an act of worship by restraining it for the sake of Allah. One approach saves the moment, the other saves your soul. Another example, imagine a woman who feels overwhelmed by her job, her responsibilities, and a small mistake by her colleague sparks fury. Psychology would advise her to count slowly, perhaps excuse herself, go for a walk, drink some water. These are practical. But Islam would tell her pause and recall that angels are recording her words, that Allah loves those who restrain anger and forgive people. The Quran says, and those who restrain anger and pardon others. Allah loves the doers of good. That changes everything. It reframes the situation not just as a workplace annoyance, but as an opportunity for divine love. Suddenly, self-control is no longer just a survival skill. It is a gateway to closeness with God. This is where Islam goes deeper than psychology. Psychology aims to reduce harm. Islam aims to transform harm into reward. Psychology quiets the fire. Islam turns the fire into light. And when you think about it, sometimes the practical tricks alone are not enough. You can count to 10. But what if your anger is so strong that 10 seconds feel like nothing? You can breathe deeply, but what if your mind is still racing with insults you want to hurl? You can walk away, but what if resentment follows you down the hall? That's when purpose matters. Purpose makes you stop not just because it's practical, but because it's sacred. The Prophet did not just give us steps, he gave us meaning behind them. To sit is to lower your pride. To wash is to cool your fire and cleanse your heart. To seek refuge is to admit that anger is not only chemical but also spiritual, whispered by Shaitan who thrives on division. When you act with this awareness, your anger is not just managed, it is elevated into patience, into mercy, into something rewarded by Allah Himself. Think of the difference. One man avoids yelling because his therapist taught him a breathing exercise. Another man avoids yelling because he knows Allah is watching and will love him more if he restrains himself. Both succeed in the moment, but the second man has transformed his silence into worship, into strength, into eternal reward. And that is the distinction. Psychology calms the mind, Islam heals the soul. When you look at the way psychology and Islam approach anger, it feels almost like two different roads leading to the same destination. One road focuses on the mind, teaching you how to analyze, reflect, and redirect your thoughts so you don't get trapped in destructive cycles. The other road focuses on the soul, teaching you how to purify, humble, and discipline your heart so you don't fall into the traps of Shaitan. And when the two are combined, something extraordinary happens. You are no longer just managing anger, you are mastering it from both inside and out. Psychology tells us that anger is often irrational, that our minds exaggerate situations under stress. It teaches us to refrain. For example, if someone cuts you off in traffic, your first thought might be, "This person is disrespecting me." That thought sparks rage. But reframing changes the story. Maybe the driver didn't even see you. Maybe they're rushing to a hospital. Maybe it has nothing to do with you at all. This simple mental shift can dissolve fury in seconds. Islam agrees with the need to shift perspective. But it doesn't stop at, maybe it's not personal. It tells you, even if it is personal, forgive, because Allah loves those who forgive. The Quran reminds us, repel evil with what is better, and your enemy will become as close as an intimate friend. Imagine how much deeper that is than reframing alone. Psychology calms the nerves. Islam elevates the heart. Picture two colleagues at work. One feels constantly overlooked and lashes out at the smallest mistakes. Therapy might teach him to pause, write down his thoughts, and challenge the assumption that I'm always ignored. That helps him see things with clarity. But Islam adds a layer. It asks him to consider that his worth is not defined by his boss's attention, but by Allah's sight upon him. Suddenly, the anger doesn't just shrink, it transforms. Instead of shouting, he may choose to stay silent, remembering the hadith, whoever restrains his anger, Allah will fill his heart with contentment on the day of judgment. That is a promise no psychological manual can offer. Consider also the home. A mother frustrated by her children's disobedience feels anger building. Psychology might suggest mindfulness. Focus on the present moment, notice the feelings without judgment, breathe until the intensity passes. And it works. She doesn't lash out, but Islam encourages her to see it as sabr, patience, a virtue that brings immense reward. The Prophet A said, "No one has been given a gift better and more vast than patience." So when she restrains her anger, she isn't merely keeping peace in her home, she is collecting treasures with God. One perspective preserves her sanity, the other promises eternal reward. This complement between psychology and Islam is not accidental. It is necessary. Because human beings are not just minds, we are bodies, minds and souls. Addressing anger only at the psychological level is like treating the smoke without finding the fire. Addressing it only at the spiritual level might feel unreachable for someone who hasn't learned the practical steps of pausing, reframing, or cooling the body. But when you hold both keys, you unlock a door that leads to complete mastery. You don't just stop yelling, you grow wiser, calmer, closer to Allah. You don't just cope, you elevate. Think of it like taming a wild horse. Psychology gives you the reins, the techniques to steer and slow it down. Islam gives you the destination, reminding you why you are even on the journey in the first place. Without reins, the horse throws you off. Without direction, you ride in circles. Together, reins and purpose take you where you were meant to go. And when you look at the world today, with broken homes, fractured friendships, nations at war, you begin to see how vital this is. How many arguments spiral out of control because people had tools but no purpose? How many conflicts could have been softened if people remembered not just to breathe, but to forgive for the sake of Allah? How many lives could have been saved if leaders paused, not just because it was wise, but because they feared standing before their Creator on Judgment Day? Psychology gives us the science of anger. Islam gives us the soul of anger. One says, pause so you don't regret. The other says, pause so you are loved by Allah. And when you carry both within you, anger is no longer an enemy you fear. It becomes a teacher, a test, an opportunity. You rise above it not only as a healthier human being, but as a stronger believer, shaping every moment of restraint into a step closer to the one who created you. Anger is not something you can erase from your life. It is woven into the fabric of being human. Even the prophets felt anger, but the difference is in what they did with it. The secret is not to eliminate anger, but to transform it, to take that fire that burns in the chest and use it to create warmth and light instead of destruction. True mastery of anger is not about silence alone. It is about turning what could have been chaos into patience, what could have been cruelty into wisdom, what could have been regret into strength. Imagine a man who loses his temper with his children. He shouts, his voice shakes the walls, and the children shrink away in fear. The house falls silent, but the silence is heavy, broken. Later, when his anger cools, regret creeps in like a thief. He wishes he could take back his words, but he can't. Now imagine the same man in another moment of anger. This time, when the fire rises, he remembers the prophet saying, "The strong is not the one who overcomes others, but the one who controls himself at the time of anger." He clenches his fists, his chest heaves, but he chooses silence. He swallows the sharp words forming on his tongue. Instead, he breathes and walks away. His children watch, wide-eyed, expecting an outburst, but none comes. In that moment, he hasn't just avoided hurting them, he has taught them the meaning of strength without saying a word. That is transformation. There is a beautiful hadith where the Prophet promised that whoever restrains his anger when he has the power to act upon it, Allah will call him before all creation on the day of judgment and let him choose from the maidens of paradise. The wording is striking. It doesn't say when you are weak, it says when you have the power. Because controlling anger is easy when you can't do anything anyway. True mastery is when you could lash out, when you could hurt, when you could dominate, and yet you hold back. That is what elevates you from ordinary to extraordinary. Think of Yusuf Eopte, betrayed by his own brothers, thrown into a well, sold as a slave, imprisoned unjustly. Years later, when he stood as a ruler with the power to punish them, anger would have been natural. Any one of us in his place might have demanded revenge. But Yusuf looked at his brothers and said, "No blame upon you today. May Allah forgive you, and He is the most merciful of the merciful." That is not suppression of anger, that is transformation. The same fire that could have fueled revenge became the light of forgiveness that healed an entire family. Modern psychology calls this reframing and redirecting, taking the energy of anger and channeling it into something productive. A person who feels fury at injustice may turn that fire into activism, into defending the weak, into writing words that inspire change. Islam embraces this, but gives it an even deeper dimension. It tells you that when you channel your anger toward what pleases Allah, you are not just finding a healthy outlet, you are earning eternal reward. Anger at oppression can turn into a prayer for justice, a donation to the needy, an act of courage in speaking truth. The anger that once destroyed becomes fuel for building something greater. In everyday life, we see this too. A wife may feel angry when her husband forgets something important. In the moment, sharp words rise to her tongue, ready to wound. But she pauses, remembers that Allah loves those who forgive, and chooses gentleness instead. That gentleness plants seeds of gratitude in her husband's heart, seeds that will grow stronger than any lecture ever could. Or a student feels insulted by a teacher's harsh tone. Anger boils and he wants to answer back. But instead, he channels that fire into studying harder, excelling, proving his worth through success rather than words. That same anger that could have made him bitter instead made him better. The Prophet himself modeled this again and again. When people mocked him, when they threw stones, when they cursed him, he didn't just suppress his anger. He transformed it into patience, into prayer, into a mercy so vast that even his enemies eventually bowed before it. That is why Allah described him as a mercy to all worlds. His anger never destroyed, it was redirected, purified, elevated. And perhaps that is the greatest secret of anger. It is energy, raw and powerful. Left unchecked, it can destroy families, friendships, even nations. But when mastered, it becomes the very fuel for greatness. It can make you courageous against oppression, patient in the face of hardship, merciful when you hold power over others. To master anger is not to kill it. It is to make it serve you instead of enslave you. And when you achieve that, your anger is no longer a weakness to hide. It becomes a strength that defines you, a sign that you are not just human, but a human who has risen above the fire within. My friends, anger is not just a feeling, it is a crossroad. Every time it rises inside you, you are standing at a door. One path leads to regret, broken hearts, shattered trust. The other path leads to strength, dignity, and the love of Allah. Do not underestimate these small moments. One outburst can destroy what took years to build. One moment of restraint can protect what you cherish most. One choice can define your legacy. So I ask you, when anger knocks, who will you be? Will you be the slave of your temper? Or will you be the master of it? Do not wait until tomorrow. Do not wait until the next argument. Begin now. Begin tonight. With your family, with your spouse, with your friends, with the stranger who tests your patience. Every spark of anger is your opportunity. Not to fall, but to rise. Rise by pausing. Rise by forgiving. Rise by remembering Allah. And remember this, the world will not remember how loud your anger was, but it will never forget how powerful your silence was. So choose strength. Choose restraint. Choose to turn fire into light. Because true greatness is not in the fist that strikes,